My son came into my room while I was sleeping, and it changed everything. It was a quiet night, the kind where the hum of the fan and the occasional rustle of tree branches against the window formed the backdrop of my dreams. I was deep in sleep, unaware of the world around me, when I felt the faintest shift in the atmosphere, a presence, a sound. My eyelids fluttered open, and there he was, standing in the doorway, illuminated by the pale light from the hallway. My son. His expression was unreadable, a mix of hesitation and determination. "Mom," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence, "I need to talk to you." I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "What is it? Are you okay?" He hesitated, stepping closer. "I don't know how to say this, but I think Dad is cheating on you." The words hit me like a freight train. My heart sank, and the air seemed to grow heavier around me. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to find out," he continued, his eyes downcast. "But I was using Dad's tablet to finish my homework. I saw some messages. They weren't to you, and they weren't about work." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Are you sure?" I asked, though deep down, I could tell he was. He nodded, his face pale. I didn't want to look, but it was hard not to. There were pictures, too. "Mom, I'm sorry." I reached out and pulled him into a hug, holding him close as my mind raced. How could this be true? I thought of the late nights, the sudden work trips, the unfamiliar perfume I'd brushed off as my imagination. Pieces began to click together, forming a picture I didn't want to see. "Thank you for telling me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "This isn't something a child should have to deal with, but I'm glad you trusted me." He looked up at me, tears brimming in his eyes. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I promise you, we'll get through this together." That night, I couldn't go back to sleep. While my son returned to his room, I sat in the dark, piecing together fragments of memories and moments that now seemed drenched in doubt. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about what came next, about protecting my family, and about finding a way to rebuild, no matter how shattered I felt. The silence of the house felt oppressive, but in that quiet, I made a decision. I would confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Because secrets, I realized, could only hold power over us if we let them stay hidden. The following morning, I moved mechanically through the motions of getting ready for the day. My son's words echoed in my mind, intertwining with the gnawing dread in my chest. I had to face my husband, and I had to find the truth. When he walked into the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, he looked so normal, relaxed, even. The man I had shared so many years with. "Morning," he said casually, placing a quick kiss on my cheek. It felt hollow. I couldn't meet his gaze. "We need to talk." His brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" I gestured for him to sit at the table. My son had already left for school, and the house was quiet. I took a deep breath, summoning the courage to break the fragile illusion of normalcy. "Last night, our son found messages on your tablet." His face froze for a moment, and then he laughed nervously. "Messages? What messages?" "Don't do that," I said sharply. "Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about." The tension in the room thickened. His hand gripped the coffee mug tightly as he avoided my gaze. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," I challenged. My voice trembled despite my attempt to stay composed. "Because our son had to be the one to tell me, and that alone is enough to break my heart." He sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "It's complicated." "No, it's not," I snapped. "Either you're faithful to me or you're not. Complicated is what happens after you've chosen to betray me." He ran a hand through his hair, his demeanor shifting from defensive to weary. "It didn't mean anything," he said, his tone almost pleading. "I was stupid. It was a mistake." "A mistake doesn't last weeks, maybe months," I retorted. "A mistake doesn't involve hiding messages and pictures." Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? To your son? He's the one who found out, not me. He's a child. He shouldn't have to carry this. His face crumpled. I'm sorry, he whispered. I don't know how it got to this point. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. Neither do I. But what I do know is that I deserve better than lies and betrayal. We deserve better. For the first time in years, I felt a surge of clarity. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about the cracks in our relationship that had gone unnoticed for too long. I wasn't ready to decide whether I would stay or leave, but I knew I had to set boundaries for my sake and for my son's. I need time, I said firmly, and you need to decide what kind of man you want to be, because right now, I don't recognize the person sitting in front of me. He nodded, his face pale and drawn. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. But fixing something didn't always mean repairing it. Sometimes it meant letting go, stepping away, and finding strength in the pieces left behind. As I walked away from the table, I realized I didn't have all the answers yet. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let his choices define my worth or my son's future. The days that followed felt surreal, like walking through a fog. My husband moved around the house cautiously, as if stepping on eggshells. He tried to initiate conversations, but I wasn't ready to hear anything he had to say. Instead, I focused on my son, making sure he felt safe and supported. One evening, as I was tucking him into bed, he looked up at me with big, questioning eyes. Are you and Dad going to get a divorce? The word hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. I sat down beside him, brushing a strand of hair off his forehead. I don't know yet, I admitted honestly. But no matter what happens, you're the most important thing in my life. None of this is your fault, and I'll always be here for you. He nodded slowly, seeming to accept my words, though I could see the worry lingering in his gaze. I just want us to be happy again. His words cut deep, but they also gave me a sense of purpose. I kissed his forehead and whispered, We'll get there, sweetheart. I promise. Later that night, I sat alone in the living room, my thoughts swirling. My husband joined me hesitantly, a notebook in hand. He placed it on the coffee table and sat down across from me. What's this? I asked, eyeing it suspiciously. It's everything, he said, his voice low. Every detail, every truth. I wrote it all down because I want to be completely honest with you. You deserve that. I stared at the notebook, unsure if I had the strength to open it. Why now? I asked. Because I don't want to lose you, he said, his voice cracking. I know I've made the biggest mistake of my life, but I need you to know the truth. If we have any chance of moving forward, whatever that looks like, I can't keep hiding. His vulnerability was startling, but it didn't erase the hurt he had caused. I don't know if I can forgive you, I admitted. I don't know if I even want to try. I understand, he said softly, but I'll do whatever it takes to make things right, even if it's just to make sure you and our son are okay. The sincerity in his voice made me pause. I didn't want to let him off the hook, but I also didn't want to make decisions out of anger. The notebook sat between us like a barrier, daring me to cross it. I'll read it, I said finally, my voice steady. But this doesn't mean I've made up my mind. He nodded, relief flickering across his face. That's all I can ask. As he left the room, I picked up the notebook, its weight surprising in my hands. Flipping through the pages, I saw his handwriting, messy, desperate, raw. It was an account of everything. The beginnings of his indiscretion, the reasons he told himself it was harmless, and the shame that followed when he realized the damage he had done. It wasn't easy to read. Each word felt like a knife, cutting through the foundation of trust we had built over the years. But it also gave me insight into him, into us, and into the fractures that had been there long before the affair. By the time I finished, tears streamed down my face, but there was also a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I understood, and understanding was a first step toward deciding what came next. I folded the notebook closed and stared at the empty room around me. Whether I stayed or left, one thing was certain. I had to reclaim my sense of self for me and for my son. And no matter how painful the journey, I knew I had the strength to face I in the days that followed. I found myself living in a state of duality. Outwardly, I went about my daily routines, keeping things as normal as possible for my son. But inside, I wrestled with the storm of emotions the notebook had stirred: anger, betrayal, sorrow, and, strangely, a glimmer of hope. Not hope for us as a couple necessarily, but hope that I could find clarity in the chaos. My husband, for his part, seemed committed to the idea of atonement. He began attending therapy on his own and gave me space without pushing for answers. He even suggested couples counseling, though I wasn't ready to commit to that step. His willingness to take responsibility was evident, but I couldn't shake the thought that it might be too little, too late. One evening, as I was sorting through bills at the kitchen table, my son came in and sat down across from me. "Mom," he said softly, his tone hesitant, "have you figured out what you're going to do?" I set down the pen in my hand and looked at him. At just 12 years old, he was so perceptive, so mature for his age. "I'm still thinking about it," I replied honestly. "These kinds of decisions take time." He nodded, then surprised me by saying, "I think Dad really regrets what he did." I tilted my head, studying him. "What makes you say that?" "I see it in how he acts," he explained. "He's different. He talks to me more, and he's always asking if I'm okay. He doesn't even get mad when I mess up anymore." His words hit me hard. My husband's actions, while deeply hurtful to me, had also rippled out to our son, perhaps making him reevaluate not just our marriage but his role as a father. "I think he's trying," my son added, his voice small. "But I just want you to be happy, Mom. Both of you." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for sharing that with me. It means a lot. And no matter what happens, I promise we'll figure this out together." That conversation stayed with me. It wasn't just about my husband and me anymore. It never had been. My son's well-being was tied to the choices I made, and that weighed heavily on me. A few weeks later, I finally agreed to attend a couples counseling session. It wasn't a commitment to reconciliation, but rather an attempt to navigate the situation with some guidance. The therapist, a calm and compassionate woman named Dr. Ellis, created a space where we could both speak openly. "I don't trust you," I told my husband during that first session, my voice trembling. "And I don't know if I ever will again." "I understand," he said, his eyes glistening. "But I'm here because I want to earn it back, even if it takes the rest of my life." Dr. Ellis guided us through our pain and resentment, helping us uncover not just the affair but the deeper issues that had led us to this breaking point. It was grueling work, emotionally exhausting, but it also forced me to confront truths about myself. How I had buried my own unhappiness for years, how I had ignored signs that something was wrong. Months passed, and I began to see a path forward, though it wasn't what I had expected. Forgiveness didn't come easily, but I realized it wasn't about excusing his actions. It was about freeing myself from the grip of anger. I deserved peace, whether or not we stayed together. In the end, I chose to separate, at least temporarily. It wasn't an impulsive decision, but one made with careful thought. My husband, though heartbroken, respected my choice. We agreed to co-parent with as much respect and communication as possible, putting our son first. The journey wasn't over, but I felt stronger, more certain of who I was and what I wanted. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to dream of a future where I could find happiness again, on my terms.